Before we get into this video, a quick reminder that the Aldas and Tomo live show is just days away, and as I'm probably releasing this, it is literally the next day on Friday, the 4th of August in London. Tickets are still available, so you can check that link at the very top of the description. We have some amazing guests lined up that are going to be speaking with us on the night on stage, including Matt and Tommy from P1, Katie Fairman, and also Dan and Blake from the Engine Braking podcast. It's going to be a really fun night. I can't wait. If you want to come through and also meet some other like-minded F1 fans as well, then don't forget to check out the ticket link, which will be at the very top of the description, and I hope to see you there. 12 races into the 2023 season, we are now at the summer break, and it's the perfect point to look back on the beginning of the season and talk about my top 5 best and my top 5 worst drivers of the season so far. I have got my list locked, ready to go right here, and I'm going to do the top 5 worst first of all, and then the top 5 best afterwards, so let's get into it. And now I will really quickly just say before I get into my top 5 that I haven't included either Nick de Vries or Daniel Ricciardo. Undoubtedly, both of them would technically be in my top 5 worst drivers, but Nick de Vries obviously didn't see out kind of the full first half of the season, and Daniel Ricciardo has done 2 races, so if I'm being serious, Daniel Ricciardo probably would be the worst because, again, he's only had 2 races, so it's just, stupid and kind of unfair in my opinion to judge those drivers, especially Daniel Ricciardo, and again, Nick de Vries, he would be quite low on the list, obviously, maybe kind of in second place now that I look at it, but yeah, I didn't kind of want to put those 2 drivers on the list. Either way, let's get into it. In 5th place, I have got Lance Stroll. Now, I think the reason why Lance has to make it into my top 5 is just the disappointment for the first half of the season, or certainly the very beginning of the first half of the season when Aston Martin did have the second quickest car. I also think that the fact that Fernando Alonso is brand new to the team, which almost goes unspoken now as well. I think he should have been a lot stronger towards the beginning of the season. There is no doubt that over the past couple of races, and even Spa for example, Lance has kind of closed that gap, especially in qualifying to Fernando, but again, he's only outqualified Fernando twice. That's not really a good look. And in the races, there's a very clear level between Fernando and Lance, and I just feel like even though he did come into the season with the, an injured wrist, and of course I take that into account, but, he did himself say that he kind of got a lot better very quickly throughout the season, and the performances just weren't there even when the car was. I mean, I think Monaco stands out as, for example, a race that I think he probably should have done a lot better at, and he had a really poor race, so yeah, it's just that gap to Fernando, and also that early part of the season when he really could have capitalized when he had the car. Again, I'm taking the injury into account, but I don't think it's been a very impressive kind of beginning of the season from Lance Stroll, given the car that he had, and also given the fact that he's got a brand new teammate as well. So yeah, I feel like there is still plenty of performance in that Aston Martin. Unfortunately, it has dropped off, and it's kind of dropped off to a level that Lance is a lot more comfortable at, that kind of top end of the midfield, not quite podium capable car, and that's the level that he's been driving at. But even when the car was capable of podiums, he wasn't getting anywhere near them. So yeah, in 5th place, I have got Lance Stroll. And next up, in 4th place, I'm actually going to talk about 2 drivers back to back, because in 4th, I have Valtteri Bottas, and in 3rd, I have Zhou Guanyu. Now, it's very difficult to kind of know how much of their season so far is down to the car and how much is down to them. I do think that they've been, very close as teammates. I think Zhou has took a really nice kind of step up in his second season in Formula 1, but I do also get the feeling that there have been some results that have been left on the table by both of the drivers. I think Hungary was a massive opportunity, and again, Zhou had his best ever qualifying in P5, but then in the race it didn't quite pan out, even though he did get a really bad start, which, the team said was not down to him. Then crashing into the back of Ricciardo and the 2 Alpines, that is not a good look. And also Valtteri, especially at the beginning of the season and just throughout the season, he's gone really missing and had really bad races as well. So even though these 2 are quite equally matched as teammates, and that's why I've kind of put them together, I think Zhou has just been a little bit below Valtteri. I feel like there is still more in that car. I know it's not a great car. I know they kind of have to almost pick their races where the results might come, but I still don't think they've maximized that Alfa Romeo. So again, it's very difficult to know how much of it is the drivers, how much of it is the car, but undoubtedly, I don't think either of these 2 drivers have had a good beginning of 2023. In 2nd place, I've got a driver that I didn't really expect to be on this list, and certainly not this low down, and that is Kevin Magnussen. Now, given his experience, given the fact that he is also the incumbent with Nico Hülkenberg joining the team in 2023, I think he's had a really disappointing season. especially when it comes to qualifying. I think Nico Hülkenberg has been an absolute star in that car, and again, the Haas is, like all of these cars, in this top 5 worst drivers list, it's a very difficult car. It's a car that can only score points on kind of certain tracks and certain occasions. For Haas, it does seem like almost the sprints are their best bet in terms of qualifying well and then hanging on to not needing to pit. But as far as K-Mag, I mean, only scoring points twice this season in Jeddah and Miami, he has not had a great season, and I think he has been thoroughly outperformed by Nico Hülkenberg. Now, the reason why I think definitely he has to go on this list is because he is struggling with that car. He is, I think, under a little bit of pressure by Haas. I do think the fact that they still need the experience. They still need both of these two drivers who I think have done an okay job, but certainly when it comes to K-Mag, he's been very open about his struggles with the car and the fact that as the car has been developed, it's almost kind of gone away for him a little bit, and that is why that's why his performances have just really dropped off, especially as of late. But you need to adapt wherever the team finds performance, whether that's, a driving style that perhaps doesn't suit you, whether that's what they're seeing in the wind tunnel. If that's what the car is, then you have to adapt to it. You have to be able to kind of, ride that roller coaster. And unfortunately, K-Mag just hasn't been able to do that yet. Whether they're going to bring the car kind of back more towards him, how that's going to affect Nico Hülkenberg's form, I think all of those things are going to be very interesting to see in terms of how Haas develop over the last course of the season. But yeah, I think given the expectations, again, that he is the experienced driver, I think he's had a pretty disappointing season so far. In first place, I think no surprises, I have got Logan Sargeant. So far, he has been whitewashed in qualifying by Alex Albon, and I think also thoroughly dominated in the races by his teammate as well. Obviously, he does have kind of the caveat that he is a rookie, but again, 12 races, the car getting better now as well. I have definitely seen an uptick in form from Logan Sargeant, but it just hasn't been enough quite yet. So I'm hoping for a much stronger end to the season. Again, he does have that excuse of being a rookie, and certainly the team, I think, especially James Vowles, with, the way that he's come into the team, they are putting, I think, the minimum amount of pressure, which we're almost not used to when you compare it to kind of, the Red Bull program with Helmut Marko. So yeah, the team are doing a great job to not put too much pressure on Logan's shoulders, but at some point in that midfield, you do need to start delivering. You do need to start kind of capitalizing on those kind of, moments where you can score points, and the Williams are certainly being capable of that, as we have seen in the hands of Alex Albon. So I think there is still a long way to go for Logan in terms of stitching together a good weekend, in terms of a solid practice where he gets the car and the setup in the window that he needs, a good qualifying as well, which I think has been a massive struggle for him so far, and then also just a clean race performance. I think, again, stringing together that clean weekend has been his biggest problem so far. I do think he has the pace to do a solid job, but yeah, I just haven't seen enough over the course of the first half of the season. And if this does continue, it's going to be, and if Albon especially keeps scoring points, is, Williams going to start mounting pressure on Logan Sargeant? That's also going to be very interesting to watch. So those were the 5 drivers who I think need to definitely improve the most after a rough start to 2023, and I think they all need to have a big bounce back in the second half of the season. But now let's get into my top 5 best drivers. Now, there's definitely a few drivers that kind of missed out. I do want to give a quick shout out to the likes of Piastri, to the likes of Ocon, to the likes of Albon. For different reasons, I think all of these drivers have had a really good start to 2023, but they just missed out. So yeah, I did still want to give them a quick shout out. In 5th place, I have got Charles Leclerc. Now, I will openly admit that Charles Leclerc wasn't kind of an instant just lock for this list. I do think that he's had some, pretty rough weekends in 2023. I mean, Miami wasn't a great one with all of those collisions, Australia crashing out on lap 1, and then also Spain as well. That was just kind of a weekend to forget for Charles, being knocked out in Q1. So it's definitely not been plain sailing, and I think obviously the entire team is disappointed that off the back of last year, as bad as it went, they still were kind of fighting for the title at one point. They kind of had a race-winning car for a portion of the season. And yeah, this year has just been a massive disappointment, but I still think that there have been kind of those Charles Leclerc moments of magic where if he was kind of put in that opportunity again with a race-winning car, I do think that he would be pushing Max Verstappen and we could have a very exciting title fight. I'm thinking, of course, of the pole positions in the likes of Baku and also in Spa as well. So yeah, the raw pace is still there. I do think he's been a much more frustrated driver, but that quality has been there. He's had a much more kind of up and down season, but there has still been those podiums, like of course in Baku and Austria and also Belgium. So he's definitely kind of delivered the results when the car has kind of allowed him to. I still think he has that kind of step of quality and definitely kind of that level of speed above Carlos Sainz as well. So I think he's beaten his teammate kind of on that regard. Carlos Sainz is not a bad driver. He's done an okay job, but yeah, I think Leclerc makes it into this list because as bad of a season as he's having, he's had a much kind of better last kind of 5 or 6 races. And so yeah, he is in 5th place. And next up, I have got Lando Norris. Of course, everyone is going to look at what he's been able to do over the past kind of 3 or 4 races, the 2 back-to-back second place podiums, and there is no doubt that Lando is one of those drivers where when the car, and he has shown this multiple times, 2021 being the perfect example, when he is given the car, when McLaren actually can contend for kind of podiums, he has always been able to up his game. He has always been able to compete for those podiums. But even looking at the beginning of the season when McLaren was so up and down, and I mean, during some weekends, they were genuinely maybe the worst car on the grid, he was still putting in some pretty decent performances. I mean, that 6th place finish in Australia to capitalize on all of the chaos, and even the 2 9th place finishes in Baku and Monaco, it's not just about what he's done now that the McLaren is kind of a decent midfield car. He's been doing this all season long. Also, he's dominated Oscar Piastri kind of on paper, even though, again, I think Oscar's had a very impressive kind of start to his rookie season at McLaren. But Lando had to be on this list. I think he's done a fantastic job. Again, he's single-handedly kind of, catapulted himself above the 2 Alpines, which, I mean, 4 or 5 races into the season, I would have thought that's absolutely mad. So yeah, Lando's done an incredible job, and it just keeps making me frustrated that McLaren can't give him this car from the beginning of the season. But luckily, we are seeing Lando in a much better car, and as always, he is delivering. And next up on the list in 3rd, I have got Lewis Hamilton. I think Lewis has had, actually, all things considered, especially when I kind of looked at the season in its totality and the fact that the Mercedes has been a weird car. I think on average, maybe you can say it's been the 2nd best car, but it has been so up and down. There's been weekends where the Ferrari is quicker. There's been weekends where the Aston Martin is quicker. There's been weekends where the McLaren is quicker. But despite that, I think Lewis he's bounced back massively, by the way, off the back of last year, which I think was a difficult season for him to kind of recalibrate not having a race-winning car. And now we're seeing the quality. Now we're seeing why he was a 7-time world champion. And even though he doesn't have a race-winning car, I think the consistency has been just incredible from Lewis. I think, the 4 podiums have been very impressive, but there's also a handful of 4th places there as well. He has always been in the mix. He has scored points in every single race so far this season. And that's just the mark of a champion, the mark of consistency. And even though he's not kind of in the best situation, the team is still frustrated with the performance of the car. I think Lewis has done a fantastic job. I also think that he is, again, after last year, he has really kind of, asserted his dominance over George Russell. Even though the qualifying is quite close, I think Lewis in the races has almost had a little level above George. So yeah, I don't think George Russell was having kind of the best season, but I know George is going to bounce back. So yeah, undoubtedly Lewis had to be on this list. I think he's had a fantastic season so far, even though the Mercedes has been so up and down. And yeah, he is in 3rd. And next up on the list, I have got Fernando Alonso. Now, we can't not talk about the red-hot start that he had to begin the season. 5 podiums in the first 6 races, and even in the one that he didn't score a podium, he was just in 4th place, just missed out. So yeah, he had a mega start. I think as the season has progressed, Aston Martin haven't quite been able to develop at the same rate as, say, Ferrari or Mercedes, or even McLaren, I think to some extent, but Fernando has still been there. I mean, again, he has scored points. Only 3 drivers have scored points in every single race so far this season, and that is Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, and another driver that we're going to get to in a little bit. And again, those 3 drivers, that just shows you their class. That is why, in my opinion, they are the 3 best drivers in Formula 1, and also why they are in my top 3. But in terms of Fernando, even though the car has dropped off a little bit, he has still kind of maintained that dominance over Lance Stroll. Again, Lance has kind of caught up a little bit, but we know who the number 1 is of that team. Fernando has still been scoring points at kind of a pretty decent level, even though the car has dropped off over the last 4 or 5 races. I kind of want Aston Martin to kind of, regain some of that form and improve in the second half of the season, because, seeing Fernando kind of fight for those podiums, he is always a box office driver. He is once again proving why he was worthy of a long-term contract by Aston Martin. And, regardless of how this season ends, regardless of where Aston Martin end up, he has had a fantastic season, and I'm sure there is still plenty of podiums left in the second half of the year. In first place was the other driver that I was alluding to, who has also scored points in every single race this season, but he has had a lot more bigger results than that, and that is, of course, Max Verstappen. 10 race wins in 12 races. 8 straight right now. He is currently just tearing through the field. He is tearing through the record books of Formula 1, driving a really good car, of course, dominating his teammates as well. But you know what? I think, and I'm going to make a video about this probably in a few weeks' time, in the sense that I think his greatness and what he's doing is almost going underappreciated, because there were weekends, Monaco for example, I think also potentially in Spain as well, where even though the Red Bull was obviously the best car, it still needed the right setup. It still needed the right kind of runs in tricky conditions, you know, when things could have gone wrong. But Max has just been so level-headed. He's been so consistent that even when there have been opportunities for kind of disaster to happen and for potentially him to be further down the field or for something to go wrong, he always pulls out the right lap in qualifying. He always does the right thing in the races, that risk versus reward. He knows he has that pace in hand, and it's been a little bit obviously frustrating as a fan to not have a closer title fight, but all you can do is appreciate what Max Verstappen does, race in, race out, the consistency, not just in the races, but even in qualifying, again, to always be there, to always have the right lap in every single condition. There have been times where Red Bull could have tripped up, but it was Max Verstappen that has kind of steadied the ship, and undoubtedly, you know, he's already won this championship. The question is, how many records can he break in the process? Can he beat Sebastian Vettel's 9 race wins in a row? That is the only questions left for Max Verstappen in 2023. Well, there you have it. Don't forget to let me know your top 5 best and worst drivers of the season so far in the comments. And once again, we are just days away from the Aldas and Tomo live show. Tickets are still available via the link at the very top of the description. It would be great to see some of you guys there. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe to this channel. That would be massively appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.